Regulation change is something that happens quite often in Formula 1. Sometimes those changes are good, sometimes those changes are bad, and sometimes they need a little bit of time to really get going, like the current regulations have done. But also, sometimes they need to either cut costs or simply improve the show. And we're back to using that term. The most recent big rule change was in 2022, when the FIA got rid of the 2017 regulations and replaced them with the ground effect cars that, like mentioned, took a bit of time to get accustomed to, at least for the teams. And in the second half of the season just gone, things amped up, and people are hoping for more of the same this year. Could 3 teams be in with a shot this coming season? Who knows? And prior to this, there was the big rule change in 2017 where the smaller cars were dumped for the big boy regulations with the fat massive tyres and aggressive looking cars that looked good, but the teams ended up producing so much dirty air that following became tricky. Because overtaking and stuff like that. And yes, they have DRS and the teams have access to a button that deploys all the hybrid energy at its maximum allowed deployment rate, so they could use both as an overtake button. And DRS passing is pretty much the way to get it done, as it stands. Maybe with the smaller cars in 2026 things might get a little better, but, well, who even knows anymore? The teams will always find ways of producing dirty air, and I'm starting to think it might be deliberate. Produce more dirty air and it's harder for cars to overtake you, but at the same time it's hard for you to follow because the other teams have had the same idea. But for 2009 there was another big rule change, and something came in with that rule change that was by design rather than an afterthought that got put in, well, afterwards. It was probably the biggest rule change since 1994 or 1995. In previous Storytime videos I've shown how the cars have progressed since that time, particularly with Schumacher's Ferraris. Between sort of 1997 and 2006, you can see how the Ferrari evolved in its design, with minor changes being made with regards to safety and rules designed to combat the aero wars that were going on, such as the move towards lower noses in around 2001 or 2002, because the FIA working group had become concerned that in the event of a T-bone accident, a higher nose like the one seen on the Benetton B195 and Williams FW18 and similar would catch above the side pod and vault the car up into a driver's head. It's probably the most stable regulation set in history, with only minor changes made for safety and competition. But by the time 2007 came around, things were starting to get a bit out of control. Aero appendages were sticking out of the cars at every weird angle, and the bodywork was chiselled and contorted in an exact fashion to extract the most amount of downforce as humanly possible. Overtakes were really confined to the pit stops during undercuts and overcuts with the refueling, because it made zero sense to try and overtake because it was just going to be so bloody difficult. Not only were the cars producing dirty air, there was the different weights to consider as well with fuel loads. Just look at these 4 McLarens, 1998, 2000, 2005 and 2007, so about 10 seasons of evolution. The 2007 McLaren has got stuff sticking out all over the place, making the 2005 car look super clean by comparison, and those late model V10 cars were starting to get pretty advanced aerodynamically. But compared to the ones from 1998 and 2000, the 2005 and 2007 ones are rocket ships. So for 2009, the FIA said that all of that had to go. Slick tyres were going to come back, the bodywork was going to be smoothed off, the wings were going to change, and other bits and pieces were going to change as well, so they could get some actual racing done. The cars had got too advanced on the aero front and they needed an overhaul. So the cars went from being spaceships to having smoother designs, almost like something from the 90s. The main difference being that the rear wings were shrunk down and made taller to send the wake over the top of the cars and not over the car's front wings in an attempt at making them follow better. As well as this, the front wings were made wider to stop teams exploiting the middle section that they'd been using before to create the underbody downforce. The theory was that the cars might now be a bit more front heavy and it would make them harder to drive in corners, as the cars will want to rotate a tiny bit more. The problem was, these changes didn't have the desired effect. Braun, Toyota and Williams all had something called the double diffuser, and that's something I've done in a dedicated video before, so I won't bore you with the technical specs. But what was also created off the front wings was something called the Y250 Vortex, which sounds like a space fighter or a space anomaly from Star Trek. Y250 made the cars even more sensitive to dirty air than they had been on the previous regulation set. But while the cars had regressed aerodynamically, there was something on the cars that was going to take them into the future, at least slightly into the future, and kind of bridge the gap between then and the new hybrid regulations that came in 2014. And that thing was called KERS. KERS is the Kinetic Energy Recovery System. push to pass if you're an IndyCar guy, and if you're a British touring car guy, then it's called the hybrid. And having been on the R Factor 2 Discord when the BTCC cars got the hybrid push to pass, it was almost a daily job explaining that the hybrid in the BTCC isn't like the hybrid on Formula 1 cars, so the way you use them is completely different. And I hope it gets binned off in the BTCC because while it did start out promising, it was a flash in the pan. Tangent aside, KERS was the futuristic thing for Formula 1 at the time, and it was marketed in the BBC's opening thing for the 2009 season as a weapon of attack and defense. Essentially, KERS stores energy in a battery, and you press a button to deploy said energy. What's clever about it is you get a set amount of use per lap that equates to 80 extra horsepower of deployment for a total of 6 or 7 seconds per lap, and once it's used up, it's used up. But when you cross the line, you get another allocation of the stuff, with the car constantly recharging the battery on the brakes. The system was initially known as the flybrid, fly being taken from the flywheel that spins incredibly quickly to generate that electrical power. This flybrid weighed something in the region of 25 kilograms and provided 80 horsepower for about 6.6 seconds. The flywheel itself weighed 5 kilos and was 240 millimeters in diameter, which could then spin up to 64,500 RPM. That's fast. In 2006, the EPFL, which is a polytechnic in France, had developed a KERS system using supercapacitors, but the FIA ultimately chose the battery option. Now, supercapacitors are being used on IndyCars right now for their hybrid system because capacitors charge up the energy a lot faster and store it as a static charge and then deploy it as necessary at a predetermined rate with the diffusion of the electrical energy, whereas batteries store the electrical energy in a chemical way, if that makes any sense. So yeah, those are the differences. But for a more technical explanation as to how Formula 1 harvested the energy, whenever the driver got on the brakes, the kinetic energy from the brakes was transferred to a motor generator unit that turned the kinetic energy into electrical energy. A power converter unit changed the AC current to a DC current, and then that was stored in the battery ready for use. When the driver pressed his KERS button on the steering wheel, the process was reversed. The DC current is sent back into the PCU, turned back into AC energy, sent back into the motor generator unit, and then deployed to increase power output. All 80 horsepower or so of it. There was a balancing act to it though. If you ran out of battery before the start-finish line, the system could turn itself off and you'd lose all engine braking. Similarly, if you had the battery charged up and you didn't deploy it before the first braking zone, or at least some of it before the first braking zone, you also lost your engine braking because the system had turned itself off to preserve the battery. So you either had to have a little bit in the tank, as it were, or you had to have about 99.7% of it in the tank as well. It was a big balancing act, and it did add a lot of strategy to the racing. So how would the drivers use it then? Nico Rosberg preferred using it out of slower corners, so he got an initial bit of boost just to get the car going again, and would also use it towards the end of a longer straight to eke out some more top speed. But the teams would work out where the optimal deployment points were for the maximum effect. This can change on a track-by-track basis and how much they might need to deploy in certain sections of a circuit. They will also need to take into account the gearing as well, which they could modify in those days. Deploying in one gear and not deploying in the same gear might not have the same effect. You could not deploy and the car bogs down, or deploy and you'll hit the limiter too soon. If you follow. I'm now going to attempt to show you how this would work. I'm not going to do any commentary on it, you're just going to hear the engine noises and you're going to see a graphic of the KERS being deployed. So hopefully this goes well. No guarantees this is actually going to be good.
Okay, so maybe I lied. I will commentate a lap, or at least I'll try to. So we're in the 2013 Ferrari here, in Assetto Corsa at Silverstone. Braking for the final couple of corners here. Upshift to third, just to keep things going. Whoa, going to use a little bit of boost on the exit of the corner, just to help things along as we start the next lap. Battery recharges. Through turn one, a little bit of a lift. Bit of a boost just to keep things moving a bit more. Hard on the brakes, in for turn three. The KERS system being recharged as I'm on the brakes. And then do what Rosberg used to do. Bit of KERS here. DRS would be open, but I've not set the car up for that. A little bit more boost just to keep things going. Into Brooklands, one of my favourite parts of the track. but I love the entire track. Luffield, really tricky when the tyres are starting to burn off. More boost on the exit. Oh, shifted a bit too early there. Up towards Cops. Dab a brake, lob it in, downshift on the curb, out the other side. It's bogging down, a bit more KERS. Pull the DRS up here. Use a bit more up. Hitting the limiter. Stow. I used a bit more on that little straight. It's hard to commentate. And then through the final couple of corners here. Short shifting for traction, and now give it the beans. Used all the KERS up, it recharges somewhere across the line. That's how it's done. Like I said, yeah, that's probably not the best commentary lap you've ever heard.
But the thing about KERS is that it wasn't without its problems in early development. At Red Bull, the factory had to be evacuated when the lithium-ion battery that stored the energy malfunctioned while being tested, and also resulted in the fire brigade being called to make sure that nothing further happened. The team and other teams just brushed this off as being part and parcel of using new technology, while over at BMW, a mechanic was given a nasty electric shock when he touched the car after Christian Klein returned from a test run at Jerez. Naturally, Klein was not sent back out until they worked out what caused the car to become charged, but the mechanic involved was not hurt beyond a bit of mild injury to his hand and a grazed arm. The BMW incident happened less than a week after the one at the Red Bull factory in Milton Keynes, leading to discussions in the motorsport media about whether this thing would be safe, let alone ready, for 2009. And one thing to take into account here is that Red Bull only tested KERS systems during 2009, they didn't actually use one competitively. Toyota boss John Howett told Autosport at the time, "I think all of these issues have been on the table from the beginning. You have voltage issues, then you have the battery issues, you have the cost of registering the batteries to transport them. People who use high-speed rotating flywheels have also got issues there. The perception of KERS is very simple, but the execution is incredibly difficult, and the road car applications are completely different from a race car. Whereas the motor, the control unit, the battery, and the basic concept is similar, the actual sophistication and needs of a road car are completely different from what we're having to develop in Formula 1. So there is a big difference. Due to the teething issues, the complexities and the costs, it's only natural that only the bigger teams used KERS in its introductory season in 2009. McLaren, BMW, Ferrari and Renault. BMW was the first KERS-equipped team to score a podium with Heusinkveld at Malaysia, while McLaren became the first team to get a pole position and a win with the device. This being when Hamilton won at Hungary and got pole at Valencia. BMW and Renault would later ditch the system. BMW had to get rid of theirs because they had retrofitted a double diffuser to the car and the KERS system simply would not fit. And this was on top of the other problems the team had, like only having 6 points on the board after 6 races. This being after they binned off their 2008 car development for the new 2009 regulations, thinking they'd get a head start. I don't know why Renault got rid of their KERS system. It might also be because they too had to retrofit a double diffuser, or it was simply because they didn't want the extra weight. And the extra weight was the reason why Red Bull never went ahead with fitting one to their car. Newey believed it was better to have better power to weight than to have only a temporary overcoming of the extra weight put on by the KERS system, if that makes any sense. And the system also increased the centre of mass, which he didn't like either. So yeah, out of the KERS equipped teams, they weren't only 2 races between them that season. KERS was great off the line though, it has to be said. Fisichella maintained for a while that the only reason Kimi overtook him at Spa was because Kimi had KERS, and Luca Badoa had initially jumped up to 14th at Valencia because he had it on his Ferrari. But it was clear that for 2009, it was better to not have it than to have it. Too many teething issues by the looks of things. Out of the 4 teams that had it, McLaren were probably the only ones to have anything working out of it, but even then, it took them half of the season to get going. Apparently Red Bull was designing a KERS system that was only for starts. So it had a smaller battery, it didn't recharge, it was smaller, it was lighter, it fit in the car better, it had better weight distribution. But for whatever reason, Red Bull never went ahead with fitting it to the car competitively. I'm guessing the scramble to get a double diffuser was a higher priority than, well, a boost button. So for 2010, none of the teams used KERS. It was still legal, but all of the teams had entered a gentleman's agreement to not use it, so that in 2011 they could come in with it if they wanted to, and the systems would be largely problem-free. Mercedes had taken over Brawn, and there was also the 3 new teams of HRT, Virgin and Lotus, so those latter 3 teams needed a bit of a helping hand too, especially since the promised budget caps had not been implemented. But it does make you wonder if Ron Dennis and Martin Whitmarsh had said bollocks to the gentleman's agreement and turned up with an F-duct and a working KERS system. That McLaren would have been an actual rocket ship in a straight line. Meanwhile, Red Bull's design guru Adrian Newey was devising a risky placement for their 2011 system, and this was to stick the KERS assembly in a place that was in the most awkward of places and risked being unreliable, but was the most optimal for weight distribution. If it worked, the other teams wouldn't bother moving theirs and would be forever playing catch-up. If it didn't, they'd have a lot of engine problems. Red Bull dominated the 2011 season thanks to having excellent mechanical handling and the blown diffuser. There was only one opponent to the gentleman's agreement. It wasn't Ron Dennis, it wasn't Stefano Domenicali, and it wasn't Christian Horner. It was actually Frank Williams. Williams had devised a flywheel-based KERS system quite similar to the Nissan LMP1 system, and he was quite eager to try it out, because he'd spent quite a bit of money on it. For 2011, KERS was back, and the minimum weight was bumped up from 720 kilograms to 640, and the best way of getting to that weight limit was to install a KERS system. 3 teams didn't use it in 2011, those being Lotus, Virgin and Hispania due to cost concerns, while Williams abandoned the flywheel design due to a packaging issue and reverted to the same battery system as everybody else. But it wasn't a total waste of money for Frank, because the team created Williams Hybrid Power to sell what they developed, and a Williams hybrid system was installed into the Audi R18s from 2012 onwards, winning the 2012 6 hours of Spa, 2012 12 hours of Sebring, and the 2012 24 hours of Le Mans, and the 2013 and 14 24 hours of Le Mans and 6 hours of Spa. LMP1 was pretty dull competitively, wasn't it? Apart from those last 3 years when it was Audi, Porsche and Toyota. For 2012 and 2013, KERS stayed as Formula 1 saw out the final couple of years of the V8 era. Just around the corner was the hybrid era, but KERS was still an integral part of the racing, especially as the DRS system that evolved from McLaren's F-duct also became a thing. The teams had a new element of strategy available to them. DRS would be a way of getting by, but the other car still had a KERS button to increase his own top speed and cancel out the combined DRS-KERS attack coming from behind, which in theory should have increased the on-track action. But with the dirty air increasing year on year, it was getting harder and harder, and those 2009 to 2013 regulations didn't really have the desired effect. You're going to start screaming 2012 and 2010 at me, but those were more tyre-based than anything else. Speaking of, I need to do the Pirelli tyres from around that era and just talk about how they used to fall off a cliff pretty badly. There was one race in 2012, I think it was, at Montreal, where Kimi stayed out too long on a set of mediums or softs. It was Montreal, it would probably be softs, wouldn't it? But either way, he just went backwards towards the end of the race. He should have finished 4th, but he ended up finishing 8th or something. But yeah, that's one for the future, and I need to double check if that's actually the right Grand Prix. These days, KERS still exists, to an extent. It's just called ERS now, and the use of it has increased as the hybrid era began and the battery formed more of an integral part of the power deployment. The 80 horsepower boost is now 160 horsepower and is active pretty much all the time now, although this is set to increase again for the 2026 regulations, which is something I'll do on a video once we know what exactly it is we're getting next year. But like the KERS system, there's only a certain amount that can be used per lap. As a result, the cars are now among the most powerful ever seen. Not as powerful as those 80s turbos in qualifying, but still pretty damn quick. KERS was, well, it was definitely a thing. It seemed to be a gimmick to start with, but because the attacking and defending driver could both use it, it brought in an element of strategy. I could never maximise it on the F1 games though, but that's just a skill issue on my part. But the added boost, the on-screen graphics, and how the drivers would carefully use it to make the most out of their lap, it had all the makings of something good. It's just that the regulations of the time didn't have the desired effect, but I'd like to know what you think down in the comments. So then, a look at the old days of KERS in Formula 1. Hard to believe that that time was over a decade ago now. If this video has given you some information as to how things worked back in the olden days, then do give the video a like so I know I did a good job. And for more stuff like this from this channel, make sure you get subscribed and get the bell on so you never miss out on anything else I do around here. Massive thanks, as always, go out to the rad lads over at Patreon that continue to support me at a more personal level. And if you want to help keep the lights on around here, there'll be a link to Patreon in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, affiliate links, and other bits and pieces you might want or need to know. Well, there's super thanks if you just want to top up my coffee cup, and memberships if you want to do Patreon without going to Patreon. So with all that said and done, I've been Aidan Millward. Have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.